Hey, what's up? This is Jason Dro and welcome to GSD Daily. Today we're going to talk about putting together a webinar funnel. We're going to draw it all out and walk through what needs to be where in order for you to have an automated webinar, an automated evergreen webinar that's up and running for you. And we're also going to work through the different kinds of calls to action. So there are two, actually. People love this diagram. So basically, how we set our funnels up is depending on the price and depending on the complexity. So if it is a more expensive price point, then we're going to need a little bit more bonding and nurture. That's only common sense, right? And of course, if it is a more complex offer, meaning you can't necessarily describe it in an elevator, then you're going to need a little bit more time with that prospect. In both scenarios, webinars work extremely well for bonding you with that prospect, more quickly than not. So the big thing about webinar funnels, I would say the big thing about nurturing prospects. So prior to COVID, it was more of a push to get somebody from paid traffic into webinar, into purchasing something. This is pre-COVID. So there was a couple things. People had their guard up a little bit more. People still do, but they hadn't necessarily ushered in this era of digital sales. People weren't buying stuff online like they are now. People weren't, going to Best Buy and ordering a laptop and then going and picking it up, curbside. So it was a little different in how quickly people were willing to spend money pre-COVID online. Now, then in COVID, people were locked in, and they were looking for community, they were looking for meaning, and they also kind of fell in love with this idea of digital shopping. So during COVID, it was never easier to get somebody to buy that first thing with you, especially like a low-end offer. $7, free plus shipping book offer, $37 digital course, like that kind of thing. But it took a while to get to the upper end of that because people were still new to building relationships online with folks. Now, post-COVID, we are psychologically, it's now to the point where the digital buying has slowed a little bit, but at the same time, people are spending more money online. So it takes a little longer to get the first transaction, and people are spending for a longer period of time. People are spending more money in a more concentrated bursts online. An automated webinar funnel is interesting because, well, way back in the day, I had to run live webinars. So there was one particular webinar that was selling the lights out. I used to sell an absolute ton of it. And I had to do like 65 webinars in a row. So 65, it was like 65 out of 80 nights I was on a webinar, doing the same webinar over and over and over again. And what was crazy about it was it still converted like crazy, but I just could not continue doing it. It was like ripping my eyes out every single time I went to look at those slides again. It was absolutely terrible. This is before automated webinars. Now we have technology, and people are used to this idea of automated presentations, that it really makes it pretty easy, for folks to set something up and get it online without a great deal of complexity. So with an automated webinar funnel, we always, typically where we start is we have our webinar registration page. So our webinar registration page then goes to a webinar room, which then goes to a webinar replay. So there are softwares that will help you set this up. You can set it up. EverWebinar is one. Demio is another. There's quite a few. So you can set them up wherever though. And then, so we have our webinar registration page, our webinar room page, and our webinar replay page. It used to be when we did these live, so live, Webinar registration used to get about 25% conversions. Then the number of people who would actually attend your webinar was closer to 25%. And then the number of people who would watch the replay was about 25%. And some of them were the same people, who attended here. So then automated webinars came around. So automated. And the webinar registrations would go up. It went up to about 30%. But the webinar room, the amount of people who would actually attend the webinar was much closer to about 55%. So you would get about double the attendance from live just by switching to automated webinar. And then the webinar replay was still 25%. Now, the thing that I like to do, and we do with a lot of our clients, is we do on demand. So an on-demand webinar is still going to get about 30% conversions, 30, 35. But the webinar room gets 100% attendance. It's because we don't give them a time. We just drop them in the webinar room page. And then the webinar replay still gets about 25%. So 25% then goes to the webinar replay. So this is our preferred style. We like doing this every once in a while. We will do this if we want to segment out between people who sign up for the webinar versus people who no-show the webinar, and we want to send them to different email sequences. And then for affiliates, we will do this one. So we will do live for affiliates. That's really it's the only time we'll do live is when we have to do live, or when there's an affiliate that is promoting it. It doesn't really make sense any other way. Everything else should either be automated or on demand. In setting this thing up, what we want to do is there's some sequences that have to be run in order for this to work. So we always, in every single one of our sales funnels, we do it this way. So we do a webinar registration, and then we have a webinar replay. Now, mind you, we do the on-demand, so the webinar room it's not an option. The webinar room is really just a confirmation page. So in order to make sure that we have people going to these places, we will write a webinar promo sequence, and that's 4 emails, and send that into the webinar registration page. So anybody who's on the list will sign up for the webinar registration. And then once they sign up for the webinar, then they go to the webinar room. And then after the webinar room, then we send 6 emails called the webinar replay sequence. So, and then that sends them to the webinar replay. So what we want to do is get them to sign up for the webinar. From the webinar, so we're going to get them to sign up for the webinar. Then from the webinar, they attend. After they attend, they get the 6 emails that promotes the webinar replay, and then those replay emails go to the offer. So whether this is a high-ticket mastermind, whether it is a coaching program, whether it's an offer, a digital offer, or whatever. Now, in order to customize this a little bit, so we send them to 2 different places though. So we'll send them to a checkout or send them to a scheduling page. Now this is important because if they are at the level where they are, so if they're like less than $3,500 now, as long as there's a payment plan, then we will send them to a checkout directly following the webinar, and then we'll back it up with a bunch of emails and a bunch of objection videos and stuff to try to stay off the sales call for clients. But a lot of our clients like being on those sales calls too. If that's the case, then we will send them to the scheduling page. So this is $3,500 or less, go to checkout, $3,500 or less. And this is greater than $3,500, go to a scheduling page. That's how we split it up. The webinar itself is a great positioning tool because not only can you talk about the problem that your prospects are facing, you can also walk through the solution. You can talk about yourself. You can talk about your company, you can talk about your experiences, you can tell stories, you know, but the biggest thing is you really want to educate them quite a bit. So when we set up webinars, like let's say this is the webinar structure itself. So we want the intro, then there's an about section, and then we talk about the problem, and then we educate about the solution, and then we pitch. So this is, all in all, this is kind of the scenario that we end up using. There are different ways, you know, that we'll go about splitting this up. So sometimes we will state the problem, and then we'll talk about our client, and then we'll educate, and then we'll pitch. There are also times where we'll actually do it this way, where it'll be intro, and then pitch, and then about, then problem, and then educate, and then we'll pitch again. So we'll do this. We'll go, this is for our super expensive stuff. Stuff like franchise sales, franchise sales, high-end masterminds, $100,000 masterminds, like that kind of thing. We'll go intro and then the pitch, because we want immediately to show any tire kickers, anybody who isn't able, we don't want to waste their time, you know. So accredited investors is another one. So we'll go intro to pitch, then about, and establish credibility, then problem, then educate, then pitch again. So it's just it's a different kind of a webinar. It still works incredibly well. But all in all, a little bit of webinar setup tactics here, you know, so the emails you're going to need, the pages you're going to need, what kind of software, the different kinds of webinars, and then of course a little bit into the webinar structure. If you have any questions at all, go ahead and comment below this video, and we will make sure to get them answered. Make sure to subscribe and like wherever you are, YouTube, Facebook, you know, wherever this video is being watched. If you have any questions at all about your own particular sales funnels and you would like to jump on an action plan call with me, then go to doneforyou.com/start and fill out the little forms, little quiz style thing. Fill that out, book a call on my calendar, and we will get you all fixed up, and I will talk to you soon. All right, thanks.